to God. And so that was the entire purpose of the ritual, to be a symbol of a covenant, of a relationship that existed. And we also said, look at Romans 4:11, and he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had yet being uncircumcised. Now, who is Paul talking about here? He's talking about Abraham. He's referring back to Abraham. Now, look at this next phrase in Romans 4:11, that he might be the father of all them that believe. He might be the father of all them that believe. Believe what? The coming of Christ. So, Abraham, who is also mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11, had a faith that was a forward faith. He believed in something that he couldn't possibly imagine. He just went on God's word. And that faith was in place, we'll look at this, before the sign was in place. It's important to know which comes first, the faith or the sign. And so Abraham here is the father of all of them that believe, though they be not circumcised. So what Paul is saying here is Abraham is the father of all who believe. But everyone who is a believer isn't going to share the same sign of circumcision that Abraham had physically. It'll be a spiritual sign. And so there's those that aren't going to be circumcised who are believers, that righteousness might be imputed unto them also. And that's an exact picture of the way salvation is. It's not something that I do, that I deserve it. I am fully righteous as I stand before the Lord, but not because of what I did. It was because of what Jesus did. And that was imputed to me. And so Paul says here that there will be those that are saved that didn't have the sign that Abraham had in him, but righteousness is still going to be imputed to them, just like they did. So the sign, first of all, you have to have the faith first, and then the sign, but the sign isn't required for the faith to be genuine, is what Paul's saying here. And so the purpose of the ritual, it was to be a sign, but the sign isn't what saves you. The sign is evidence that the saving happened, is what Paul is saying. So the purpose of the ritual. Let's look at the second thing here. B, the practice of the ritual. You know what? I just about forgot some of this story. Exodus chapter 4, verses 24 through 26. You know, we read the Bible and we watch like the Ten Commandments or something, and sometimes people get those two things jumbled up. You know, they think Cecil B. DeMille's depiction of what happened is somehow scriptural, and so they lose details and things like that. But one of the details that had sort of slipped my mind was in Exodus chapter 4, verses 24 through 26, after the Lord had called Moses. You know, I always remember Moses' protestations. Hey, I can't talk. I'm a murderer. They're not going to listen to me. I've been back here on the backside of the desert, for these 40 years. And God answers all of his protestations, and he says, no, that's not good enough. I'm going to take it. But then there was this incident in verses 24 through 26 of Exodus chapter 4, that prior to leading Israel out of Egypt, this is what happened. He had actually not even gotten to Egypt yet, and it came to pass by the way in the end, so he was on his way back from Midian, that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. Then Zipporah took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son, one of Moses' sons, and cast it at his feet and said, surely a bloody husband art thou to me. So he let him go. Then she said, a bloody husband thou art because of the circumcision. So this sign that God told Abraham, hey, want this sign to be on all of your heirs after this. Evidently, Moses had neglected this sign on the part of his own son. And so it hadn't been performed yet, and so the practice of the ritual was something that was taking place in the family. It wasn't a public thing, but it did become a public thing when the children of Israel had been led out of Egypt and had been wandering around in the wilderness. All those warriors they were Israelites, but they were still living in the land of Goshen. They had all been practicing circumcision, and then they got out and they were out in the wilderness, and it had sort of evidently stopped. And so Joshua commanded by God to reinstitute circumcision for all the Jews. If you look at Joshua chapter 5, verses 2 through 7, we see this is not 8-year-old or 8-day-old boys. This is men who are getting ready to fight here. At that time the Lord said unto Joshua, make these sharp knives, and circumcise again the children of Israel the second time. And Joshua made him sharp knives and circumcised the children of Israel at the hill of the foreskins. And this is the cause why Joshua did circumcise all the people that came out of Egypt that were males, even all the men of war, died in the wilderness, by the way, after they came out of Egypt. Now all the people that came out were circumcised, but all the people that were born in the wilderness, by the way, as they came forth out of Egypt, them they had not circumcised. For the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness till all the people that were men of war which came out of Egypt were consumed, because they obeyed not the voice of the Lord, unto whom the Lord sware that he would not show them the land which the Lord sware unto their fathers that he would give us, a land that floweth with milk and honey. And their children whom he raised up in their stead, them Joshua circumcised, for they were uncircumcised, because they had not circumcised them by the way while they were traveling in the wilderness. And so it was it was a practice that was begun with Abraham in the family. Then again, Moses, Moses was, a lot of his training had been Egyptian. He was raised in the house of Pharaoh, so it's understandable why it's possible that circumcision had not been performed on his children, his male children. And so the Lord said, no, we're going to get this right. If you're going to be the leader, this is going to be evident. And so then we have the children of Israel out in the wilderness for the entire 40 years that they're out in the wilderness. And it's the older folks that were circumcised, that had been circumcised in Egypt, but once they began traveling, they weren't performing circumcisions at all. It was a while before they even had a tabernacle for them to worship in. And of course, this was something that was commanded for the priests to do. And so some of these things had just been sort of neglected. And so it was reinstituted. But in both instances, God commands the circumcision, and it becomes both a sign and a bond. And so it isn't something that is done to make one worthy. It's a sign that they have made that commitment. And then, and especially the case of the men of war during Joshua's time, these aren't 8-day-old boys. These are men who are going to experience a great deal of discomfort because of this. But they're saying to one another, we're going to do this because it's the right thing. And it's something that we're entering into, a level of commitment. And I'm going to be standing by my brother ready to spill my blood, and we all have achieved the same level of commitment. It was a bond. If the bond wasn't there originally, the physical sign wasn't going to make a difference one way or the other. But it did serve as a bond. So it was a sign and it was a bond. A sign that God's about to do something special with these people, a bond that each man shared with his brother, that he was committed in the same way to the same God for the furtherance of his will.